What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Action Network podcast. I am your host, Evan Abrams, and today I am joined by the one, the only. He's the man. He's the West Coaster, Raybon, Chris Raybon, NFL expert. What's up, man? How you doing?
What's good, Evan? I don't know. I'm good, but not as good as Jalen Milroe right now.
Oh my God, yeah. So we're gonna get into that, and I think one of the discussion points, and maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something, but players getting invited to the draft and Shador not going, and this and that. It's a topic for later, but like always, Raybon, I think we do have to go one by one here at the top of the board just to make sure we cover all of our grounds. The thing that is exciting is this close to the draft, we're starting to get a little more options in the betting market, and we're seeing
Yeah.
picks 5, 6, 7, 8 now listed at a majority of books. So let's just start off there. Let's go one by one here. So obviously, Cam Ward at the top. He is minus 20,000. There's really been no change. It is interesting to note, and going a little back in history here. So, end of February, Ward was minus 140. He was minus 1,200 by the end of March and minus 2,000 a few days later. And honestly, Abdul Carter has been the second option there to go one almost the entire time. So, I'll toss it to you probably for maybe a one sentencer, but are we good here? Like, there's no thought in putting any more money of ours into the market here, right? At number one?
Uh, I don't think so. I think we were on Cam Ward when he was priced reasonably. Right now, it's I know Tennessee explored some trades, but didn't see anything. I think they're set on taking a quarterback here. So yeah, I think Cam Ward was the play. I think now he's overpriced, and it seems like everyone's fighting for second.
Yeah, I think the only betting market thing we would even consider if you started to see team to
Hmm.
draft one or something like that, because you had discussions about the Giants, and I'd even see some mockers, having that discussion as well as that is still a possibility. But let's move on to number two here. So uh, Travis Hunter, no serious change, odds on, but he's moved from minus 280 to minus 310, so a little more confidence. Now, also good to remember here that 2 weeks ago, Abdul Carter was minus 250 to go to. Hunter was plus 185 and Shador was plus 850 at that time. So Hunter right now is sitting at minus 310, though. Carter at plus 240, and now Shador at all the way at 14 to 1. So lending it to you here. I mean, my opinion before you start is I think there is a chance to go some other route here at two. I think there's more volatility. I think one is kind of locked in place, and I think two has a little more of a chance for us to find something. But what are your thoughts right now with Hunter now minus 310?
I think it makes the most sense, but it it's like you said, it's not locked in stone because I think, especially when you look at these teams that are sitting in that number two spot and down, in this draft, they all are willing to trade, and so there could be one of those trades where you see movement between like a Giants and a Browns or something like that that can just kind of throw everything off. Now, I think Hunter should be the pick here, but
Okay.
I again we kind of looked at this back when Shador was a favorite, and then Carter was a favorite in this number two spot, and you could get Hunter at plus money. Now, I don't think this is the time to bet Hunter. I think Carter probably makes a little sense, to throw a little bit on him. It seems like just based on everything we've reading the tea leaves, it seems like quarterbacks in general have been sliding, in the draft. So I know we looked at Shador and Jackson Dart at some long odds. I don't think I would put anything more on that, but I think a guy like Carter might make some sense in the to bet on in the spot just because he was the big favorite, and now all of a sudden I mean, I know there's been pro days and things like that, but I think a lot of this movement has just been generated from kind of what we've been hearing about these quarterbacks, which we don't know are smoke screens or not. So and then just the fact that Cleveland could trade out of this pick, but yeah, I think the one that makes the most sense to me is kind of probably the second most likely option, which would be Carter.
I want Shador or Dart to make sense here,
Yeah.
especially at like 14 or 15 to 1 for Sanders, and now Dart up to 90 to 1, as we've had discussions about that in the past. But I just don't think so. Like I'm seeing, and listen, unless the entire, even experienced mock community is completely and utterly wrong here. Because even as of today, I mean, he's being placed now. That's Shador, the 21s, the 32s. I mean, the highest we're really seeing him, or lowest, depending on how you look at this, would be ninth to New Orleans. So I just don't see how Cleveland, I think we took a chance on that a little while ago, and I think it's probably passed. So I think Hunter probably is the right move, but Carter would be an okay play at this
Yeah,
point. So
I mean,
yeah,
this pick is kind of like the Trump with the tariffs, right? It's like the now seriously though, it's like Trump's like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then the market goes this way, and then he says
yeah,
this, and then the market. It's like I think the reason we're seeing so much movement with the number 2 pick in particular is just because we don't have much to go on. So like every little thing we get, it's like, as if you're mocking, you have to react to it. So like I think Joe Shane said, I don't think we're gonna draft a quarterback here, and then all of Shador's picks odds go down, and I think Cleveland's kind of saying the same thing. But at the same time, like no one's incentivized to say they want the guy they actually want at this pick, or for these picks, because like I said, everyone is willing to kind of trade up or down in these spots, and if you're at the top, obviously it's mostly traded down. So it's a real interesting situation, but I do think there's been a lot of reactivity. But it does seem like the general consensus, if you're just reading between the tea leaves, is that and it is something we kind of touched on. It's we looked at it more with receiver, and it could be true of quarterback also, but it just doesn't seem like this is as much of a offensive passing game type of draft. At least that's how it looks right now. Doesn't seem like the teams are really hurting for wide receivers and going to overpay for them. And you're starting to see the quarterbacks after Cam Ward slide down the board too. So we'll see if that holds up, but that's kind of what it's been looking like if you kind of zoom out and look at the larger picture.
it is a decent point. I think that's also why it could show some value on Genty at certain positions, because he seems to be the only skill player that I guess is holding his ground at the top of the draft. So we could talk about that in a second. But let's move to number 3 here. Abdul Carter. Odds on, he was minus 170, which moved to minus 220, and now sitting at minus 240. So just like Hunter, I think we're moving closer and closer to the draft. There's been very little movement, obviously no trades. And I think once you start to solidify people into these slots without any news, the odds just kind of keep moving up until you get different news. And I think that's probably what's happening here. The interesting bet, now we're starting to see some exact order props. Now, if you believe Ward 1, Hunter 2, and Carter 3 as something that's going to happen based off Shador's slide, there is a prop right now on Ward 1, Hunter 2, Carter 3, and Will Campbell at 4 at plus 210. So it would pretty much be a bet on Campbell at that point if you believe the first 3. So I guess you could comment on that prop, but more or less, is there anything else to do at 3? Because I think it's probably just the same discussion we're having with 2, right? It's believe one thing and the other one probably happens when it comes to the Giants. But I'll say this: the workout that they're having, that they're going to see Shador, and they're trying to, make sure that they're seeing what they want to see. And I think the building is kind of split, and that's probably why they're doing this. And again, when you're dealing with 2 quarterbacks or 3 quarterbacks, it's probably none. But what are your thoughts there?
The Giants building that's a building. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the Campbell at plus 210 is overpriced. Just
right.
because like we still don't know. Like we're still 8-9 days out from the draft, and I still don't think that top 3 is 100 is like solidified to the point where you're saying, okay, I just want some value by adding in a
I
fourth
tend to
guy.
agree. Yeah.
So I still don't believe the Giants. Maybe they don't know exactly what they're gonna do. And or maybe they do and they just aren't trying to give it up. But I still don't think that the Giants are kind of a known entity here at 3. And so I think if they really truly feel like it's not worth taking a quarterback here, I think they would trade. And if they trade, that could set off another trade where, who knows, maybe Again, maybe the Browns are involved, maybe they're not, but I think either way, there could be. I wouldn't bet Carter to the Giants here. I think a smarter bet, if you're trying to look at Carter, would be maybe Carter to another team that the Giants could trade with, because I don't think they're as interested in him here just because of the way their current roster set up. He's a really great player, but I think I just don't think he'd be like a big luxury here, and especially when they need, quarterback and defensive back and things like that. So I think they would consider trading this, and maybe it's the Patriots who jump up like one spot, because they have a quarterback and they're very interested in Carter, and the Giants and Patriots do have relationships going back a while. So I would kind of look at the number 3 spot. I do think Carter would be the most likely guy if it's not a quarterback. And it would probably be the Giants trading out of this pick. So that's where this thing could kind of get turned a little upside down. But I think the Patriots, maybe moving up one spot, because again, you got to start looking at who has draft capital and who could move around. And I think the most realistic trades, there's always going to be trades, I think, that come out of the blue that we just don't really foresee. Off air, we were talking about Penix last year. But as far as trades that make some sense, I think you'd have to look at teams close to each other in the draft order, moving at the top, because it would kind of be a 1-for-1 plus a little extra compensation there for that, to move up that one spot. Whereas, you're going down the list and now you're getting into these more complicated trades and you're just wondering if it's worth it, especially if it's not going to be for a quarterback.
Yeah, if it's Dallas or San Francisco or Miami, like they're just going to have to give up a lot to get into that zone. And I think we're just seeing it this year it's not worth it for some of these players. The two things I thought that came to mind based off of your comments, Carter at 2 and Carter at 4, which would be plus 240, plus 550 range, seems like it would be a decent idea, except for the fact that like these trades, Carter could go 3 to another team.
Yeah.
And that kind of screws that up. So that would be my only hesitation in sprinkling on both and hoping that one hits in the chaos. And the other thing, the funniest outcome, and I can't believe I hadn't brought this up before, would be the Giants taking Genty at 3. I know it's not going to happen, but it just would be the funniest thing possible that they were like, okay, now we need a running back. That's 70-1, but that's not something I'm going to recommend.
Yeah, I would hope not. I mean, they got a pretty good find in Tyrone Tracy later in the draft. And they've been going. They went with Neighbors. They went with Banks. That's like a 1-for-2. So I don't
it doesn't
know.
make sense, but it's the funniest outcome possible. All right, let's go to number 4 here. So Will Campbell was even, which moved to minus 170, now up to minus 200. So he is minus 200 to go 4th overall. And I'm honestly, he's had a rise on lots of draft boards, but I think he's honestly being placed at number 4 because that's just who's left at this point in terms of the most talented player. So I do think there is a ability to adjust here in terms of another option at the 4th slot, which I think gets super interesting. So you can talk about 4 and 5 together, but I think this is the opportunity in the market at the moment.
Yeah, and from what I've been seeing, the Patriots are by no means settled on their decision at number 4, and I've heard both of the names, Campbell and Mason Graham. Obviously, we've heard Membo, the other tackle, in place of Campbell in this spot at a certain time, and we kind of were looking to fade that, and that looks like it maybe turned out smart. I don't know how much has changed there, but the Patriots are definitely considering a guy like Mason Graham here as well. Now, where it gets interesting is that the Patriots or another team could trade out. Maybe, this is where you start hearing those whispers of, if a team wants Genty, might they have to trade into the 4, at least the 5, because the Raiders are sitting there at 6. So this is where it gets complicated. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, because while we did kind of load up on Campbell in terms of if he was going to be the pick versus Membo, like now to your point, now it's like Campbell's a little overvalued. He's just kind of getting placed here because he makes the most sense, where we don't know for a fact that the Patriots want to even stay here, or that they're set on even taking a tackle, much less Campbell. So yeah, I would fade this at this point. I think this is another one where the time to get in was when it was like, yeah, Campbell's not even the favorite tackle to go in this spot.
I think the value, honestly, and you had briefly mentioned it and kind of moved through it, was Graham at 4, which
Mm-hmm.
I see it like 18 to 1 in a few places. So I think we can have the discussion about Genty because I think Genty at 4 or 5, and one of those markets are moving, but we're going to save that for a topic coming up. But I think Graham at like 16, 18 to 1 at 4 just feels like incredible value based off of a trade, B, one spot. Right? Like he has been pretty much a low odds on favorite at the 5 spot for a bunch of weeks in a row now. And I think it's the same reason why Campbell's moved to minus 200. He's kind of just been the best player at the board for Jacksonville in that 5 spot that makes the most sense. But necessarily, I don't know if it means it's actually going to happen. So that I think him at 4 is actually an interesting play at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you got Carter at 3, Graham at 4, kind of makes sense. Teams trying to get those guys before they're gone, and then maybe the Patriots move back. Maybe the Patriots have traded out of that pick completely at 4 too. So there's a lot of ways, and maybe they just take Graham. Like again, as the two names I saw them considering were Campbell and Graham. Now, again, you could have smoke screens, a lot of different things, but the fact that like you said, Graham is uh such a long shot to go in a spot where a team seems to be considering him maybe as their second option, if or even equal to their first. That seems way too long.
I agree. All right, so let's keep rolling here, though. So books have actually placed pick 6, pick 7, and pick 8 over the last week or so. So we can go through these a little quickly. So number 6 is the Raiders, and Ashton Genty is between minus 120 and minus 150, depending on the book to go at this slot. Jalen Walker, Will Johnson, pretty much the second options. It is worth noting that Will Johnson is like plus 300 at one book, while he's like 7 to 1 at another book. So another reminder to shop. But anything on the 6 slot, like it's just been Raiders and Genty the entire time. I do think there's some value on that 4-5, which we'll talk about, but everyone has him slanted to 6.
Yeah, this is probably a fade for me. I don't think it's a smart bet necessarily at this point because number one, I think there's like you said, just with the uncertainty or maybe the fact that there's certain guys that after those top 3, maybe there's kind of it's like wide open where okay, teams like Will Campbell, teams like Graham, but they're not willing to necessarily like they're okay with trading out or getting them. They're not. So if a team wants Genty might end up going, like you said, 4 or 5, where somebody trades up with New England or with Jacksonville. Also, the Raiders, we've just kind of been assuming that the Raiders are going to, go for this flashy pick because of their history and, what they've kind of done in the past. But this is still kind of a Raider team that's, under some new management and whatnot that we don't know exactly how they're going to, what they're going to do here. And if they're going to kind of act in the same ways that they've been known to based on their tradition. So you could just get the Raiders fading Genty themselves in this spot, and I don't think that's priced in well enough here with him being over 50-50 odds to go in this exact spot. I just think that's a poor bet because I think he could go higher. I think he could go lower, and I don't think it's 50. I don't think it's above 50% chance that he goes exactly here.
I think it's interesting that for Will Johnson in that 6 slot. So say Genty goes. I think Will Johnson has some interesting value. I see plus 750 at BetMGM. It is different at other books. That is one of the highest prices I see. The other thing I also note is the Raiders, if you just look at position first player drafted, plus 333 to take a cornerback. And to me, selecting just Johnson in that slot at, almost 4 to 1 added onto the value seems like a decent dart bet to me at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a very real chance that the Raiders, don't take Genty. I mean, again, I think we're all just trying to put to kind of, it's like a puzzle when everyone's trying to fit things together. And so you see a team that needs a lineman. You're like, okay, Will Campbell. You see a team that has always kind of drafted in a certain type of way. And it's like, okay, Raiders, Genty. But in reality, there's a lot, and we've talked about this before. There's just a lot of newer regimes, right? In terms of, you talk about the Giants building. I mean, they've been together for a couple of years now, and it's like there's other teams where we just don't know what they're going to do at the top of this board. And I think Jacksonville is one. The Patriots are kind of under new management here. So the Raiders. So it's like what these teams might not react, traditionally. So if you look at the Raiders roster, yeah, they could use a cornerback too. It's not just we know they could use a running back, but at the same time, it's like the Raiders, they did kind of pull running backs out of their hat last year, and it worked out okay. I mean, Amir Abdullah played well for them. He's a journeyman. McCormick played well for them. He was like buried on the practice squad. So who knows if they feel like they need to spend this pick on a running back. So yeah, I think that Will Johnson would make a lot of sense here, and the fact that you can kind of cross reference it and find the best market between betting the pick or betting the team, or kind of even just kind of looking at, okay, are these odds off, makes a lot of sense here. So yeah, I would look at a defensive player to the Raiders in some form or fashion here, because I think Genty, the time to make that pick was further back. Like now he's over 50-50. I don't think that's realistic.
I mean, they could walk away with Will Johnson at 6 and like Travion Henderson at 37 and
Right.
still kind of, cross off a bunch of players on their list. So that's the way I look at it. All right, let's talk about 7 and 8, and we can kind of group them together a little bit. So at 7 is the Jets. Membu is minus 120, basically to go in that slot. Tyler Warren is the second option at about 3-1. And then number 8 is Carolina. Walker has been the linebacker has kind of been always placed to Carolina in that slot, kind of being one of the better defensive players available. He is between plus 110 and plus 145. So I think Walker is kind of just a bit of a shrug. Carolina has a need. He's probably the best available. I don't know how much it actually makes sense or fits overall based off of them loving him. More as well, just, best player available. Second there would be Mykel Williams, who's between 3 and 4-1. So in terms of the Jets and the Panthers, any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think the Panthers kind of played it smart. I don't know if you saw the comment, but they kind of said, yeah, we're open to trading out of that 8 pick. And I think, given what we've seen with the quarterback sliding a little bit, I think that was a smart thing to say, because they're kind of saying, hey, if this quarterback slide thing is real, and like you guys at the top of the draft really don't want him, well, at some point somebody's probably going to want a quarterback, maybe by 8, and maybe we get some love here and get some extra picks for trading down. So this our guy Matt Mitchell was talking to us off air about what is the likelihood of a Penix like trade happening and just throwing all this stuff off, and I think it's very high, because just of all these teams willing to trade these picks early on, and there not being a ton of players, and everyone's like, we need him here, and we're just not trading out no matter what. So I think this could be one of those spots where we see a trade that it's hard to kind of, it's an unforeseen Penix like trade here, and it could be for one of the quarterbacks or something like that. So I wouldn't really bank on Carolina being in that 8 spot. Now the 7 spot is interesting for a little bit of the same reasons. I think the Jets also could low key be live for a quarterback here. I think Tyler Warren gets mocked to the Jets a lot just because it's one of those things that makes sense. But Membo being minus 120, I don't think that makes too much sense either, because just kind of going off of what we said with Campbell, right? We're not 100, we're not even 50-50 necessarily that Campbell is going to the Patriots at 4. So Membo he could be the first tackle, but he could also fall down the board. So I think these two are where you want to go long shots. I think these two are where, or 7 and 8, that is, are where you want to look at what what would be the impact of a potential trade. And I do think, this is one where you start considering maybe some long shot quarterback odds again, just because you could, the Panthers don't need a quarterback, but they've openly said they're willing to trade out, I think, in kind of response to what we're seeing in terms of these quarterback slides. So I wouldn't be surprised if for a quarterback or just something unforeseen that we see just pure chaos at these spots.
Yeah, so looking at the odds here, so Shador to go seventh, which would be the Jets taking him or a trade, is about 13 to 1. And Shador to go eighth, which 100% would be a trade because that's Carolina,
Yeah.
is 18 to 1.
Mhm.
So I think yeah, I think the Jets could draft him if he's still there. I would love for Shador to be on the board at least for number 7, so they would have to say no to him because, Fields is definitely 100% not 100% the answer, right? Like he is an experiment that they're bringing in. So having another quarterback in the room with him, like Shador, I think would be intriguing. So I do think him being on the board and them saying no, something I'd love to see. I think the other angle I would take, other than maybe a dart on that 13 and 18 to 1 with Shador at 7 and 8, is are we positive that if the Jets did go offensive line, that they
Mhm.
prefer Membu over like Banks? Like, say Campbell's off the board. Do we
Mhm.
think Kelvin Banks, because he's really moved up a lot of boards
Yeah.
here in terms of prospects. He's like 11 to 1 to be in that 7 slot. So those are the only two suggestions on long shots as we get a little deeper in the draft that I would consider at this point.
Yeah, and you also got to consider, and it's kind of hard to see through all the noise when we're going one by one of these picks, but there's also the possibility of Campbell, Membo going like 4 or 5 or something like that, right?
Sure.
And then the Jets are still sitting there at 7 and still on an offensive lineman, and Banks goes, like there could be a runner on offensive line because it seems like okay, the quarterbacks are sliding, the receivers are sliding, offensive linemen, they're still like Banks is climbing, Campbell's
Yeah.
kind of climbing a tiny bit, I would say. And then and Membo had his time where he was the favorite at number 4. So you have this could be just an offensive line type of a draft after those top 3 guys. So that's another thing to consider. So I think there's these different outcomes. I think you want to kind of take positions on, what you think is going to be the theme here. But I don't think that's a bad call at all, especially if you're just really down on these quarterbacks and you're thinking, okay, the fact that Shador didn't, there's the invite and whatnot, no invite that he's going to drop. Then I think offensive line would make a lot of sense to be kind of there be a run on that position early. I mean, we saw how much it hurt a team like the Chiefs, perennial Super Bowl contender with Patrick Mahomes. The O line wasn't right, and they couldn't get it done. And you kind of contrast that with a team like the Eagles, who their offensive line one of the best in the league, and it paid off for them. So I think sometimes there's these themes, and I think Banks rising and the 2 tackles, who both have been the favorite to go at 4. If you kind of read between the lines there could just be a run on tackles very early in the draft. So yeah, I don't mind that Banks play at all.
And Banks, like we've been talking about, one of the largest risers. I mean, he was at 24 and a half for his draft position. Now I see 14 and a halfs and 13 and a halfs in the market,
Yeah,
and
and
like
it's still a
minus
long
200 to
shot.
the under. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still. I mean, I think I asked you last week if Banks was like a possibility, and we were like, it's probably still a long shot, but the way he's been climbing,
Yeah.
I do think like that's the one position that we've seen like some positive as a whole. Quarterback sliding, wide receivers kind of sliding. It's like, okay, well, somebody has to take those spots if these teams want to improve their passing games, right? Like there's something's got to give here. So yeah, I'm kind of warming up to the fact that you could just see just for kind of lack of a better maybe it's just for lack of a better option. I mean, when you're kind of in a little bit of a predicament there and you're sitting at the top of the board. I think usually offensive tackle is a pretty safe kind of way to go. So maybe that's just how it happens. There's just not a lot of guys that people like at the top of this board, and as a result, this bunch of tackles start going above earlier than we expect.
Yeah, I kind of wish I could propose my own long shot, which would be like over 2.5 offensive linemen in the
Yeah.
top 10 or
I
something
mean, you
like
might
that.
see that. Just watch it because again, there's that's just I think that's a really sharp bet, and there are some really sharp people, making these mocks and making these bets, and so the books do get hammered, and which is why they don't always post a lot of these too early. Because imagine if we've already seen just ridiculous movement in like the 2, the 3, even the 1. I mean, for Cam Ward to go from like minus, it was like what, even money when we started first talking
Yeah.
about it, almost even money to minus to like for minus 220,000 it is now. Like
Yeah.
that's pretty crazy. And for the books to have had that up the whole time. So they just don't want to get hammered, but you probably will see something to that extent, maybe a day, 2 days, 3 days before the draft. So I would look out for that.
Yeah, we have a ton of content and pods coming out next week. I'm really hoping by like Monday, Tuesday, when we start pumping out more stuff, that there's more available. We've reached out, I've reached out, I've asked. I think it's a bit of a shrug at the moment because I think they are scared on a bunch of things and it's just not worth it. But we will see what next week looks like.
And do you guys ever watch sports and you find yourself wishing there was a way to get more into the game? Well, with Underdog, there's finally a way to make picks on sports without leaving the crib. The game is in your hands to play. Choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats. We're talking touchdowns, strikeouts, points scored, all that. And they've got all of your favorite leagues, teams, and stars to choose from. Create entries with all football picks or mix and match across other sports. You can play with as little as $1. And if you get everything right, you can win up to 1,000 times your shmoney. So turn $1 into 1,000 just with your sports knowledge. I love to play Underdog. Already started getting into their best ball product, which is great as well. So be sure to download the Underdog app and sign up now using promo code Action Network to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with promo code Action Network. Claim your special offer today and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon your first deposit. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXTSTEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPENY or text HOPENY.
All right. We are going to talk about a few new markets I see out there, and then we're going to do some rapid fire
All
draft
right.
and NFL questions. So, the two markets I see that are up within the last, 3, 4 days is top 10, a bunch of players listed. Will they be a top 10 pick? And then a bunch of players listed. Will they be a first round pick? So, over the last 24 to 48 hours or so, some of the biggest jumpers in terms of odds in the top 10. I saw Membu move from minus 270 to minus 350. I saw Dart go from plus 410 to plus 340. And Hampton went from 10 to 1 to plus 750, all to go into the top 10. So obviously, Dart and Hampton would be long shots to get into that zone, but they're getting hype. And Membu, I think we've been talking about, so he's getting longer, at 4, at 5, at 7. Those are all interesting options, but anything in that top 10 market, it's just another way to really play some of these props that we've been talking about to go 1, 2, 3, just different odds. So is there anything here that interests you?
I think it's worth just pointing out again, Membu getting, going from 270 to 350. That again signals that, hey, maybe there's gonna be a run on tackles early in the draft. And then as far as Dart's eyes getting a little shorter, I
Yep.
think that might be the way, if you want to attack okay, somebody like Carolina at 8 trading out. We still don't know what the Saints are going to do at 9. So if you think that there is going to be a quarterback to jump up and kind of, a team to trade up and go for a quarterback here, maybe you do it like that with, a dart to top 10 type of pick rather than trying to nail down the exact pick, because then you could go in so many different directions. You're going to have so many bets, and a lot of them are going to be drawing dead. Now you could get some longer odds if you can pick the exact spot. I think maybe 8 is one where you do throw a little hedge on, but that's probably the way you want to attack it if you're just a little less sure, which we aren't. We aren't sure exactly where it would happen, but it could definitely happen in the top 10. And the Hampton, he got a little shorter. I mean, I think that's just noise with the public in general. This is one of the tougher mock drafts, I think, just because of all the trade possibilities. Because of again, I think just the slippage of quarterback, wide receivers not getting too much hype. So it's kind of tough for, like, if you're just more of a casual mocker or whatever, you're just looking at this, and maybe you start looking at a guy like a running back, and you think, oh, if Gentry's going to go early, maybe another one does too. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think more likely it would be the opposite. I think there's just a lot of good running backs in this class, and teams might fade running back early and feel like, hey, we could still get a good one. And then you might see a lot of trade action, in the late first round, early second, and just throughout the rest of the draft, of teams trying to get the running back that they want, or at least, before there's a run on the position. But as far as Hampton, I don't. I get it. I get why the thinking is why his odds would get shorter, but that's when I would fade.
Got it. I think that's interesting. I mean, the way I look at this is two things. So we had talked about 3 offensive linemen top 10. The way to probably play that would be to take Banks at plus 200 to be a top 10 pick. Campbell is minus 600. And even if Campbell slips, I think Campbell would go like 10 to the Bears potentially. So I think if Banks goes top 10, all 3 will go top 10. But at least just taking Banks top 10 to 2-1 would be a way to potentially play that. And then the other one that I think is a little bit out of left field, and we've seen him mocked. His range is probably one of the more wider ones we've seen, which is McMillan. And I think some people grade him behind Golden. Some people grade him as like one of the best wide receiver prospects based off of his skills, his attributes, his height. Like, there's all sorts of things people can either love or hate him for, but I think there could be some team who's enamored by him. So I see him at plus 430. I've seen plus 450. I think in that range to get plucked maybe at the 10 slot if the Bears trade out, something like that. I'm not sure the Bears need another wide receiver. But something like that kind of crosses my mind as, like, if you're going to go strictly based off of talent, and we're going to have the discussion on, okay, if someone trades, who would they want and who would they like come down to get? He crosses my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it. It's just kind of, there just hasn't been a lot of hype with the receivers. But the one thing that's been interesting to me with the receivers is, and just kind of this draft is, are we shifting back, just more to that Raiders mindset across the board of, we just want these speed guys, because it could even be, you could kind of apply that same thinking to a guy like Golden then, right? I mean,
I guess you could.
I mean, McMillan has been the favorite at wide receiver, and that kind of top choice for most of the offseason, and then Golden kind of passed him. But I mean, if we're kind of looking at, I think, the fact that we just haven't been seeing much hype around receiver or quarterback in this draft, I think it just makes it more likely to me to, like, guys like Golden, Bond, Burden, like those guys, there would be some more movement for. Whereas McMillan's probably gonna, I would think, drop to somebody who is probably going to get a steal. But I just don't know if, based on what we've been kind of seeing in this draft, if somebody's going to trade up to get him. I think it's more likely that he falls into I would want to bet team to draft him, because and look at some teams that he could kind of fall to in these in the late first. Not that they've traded up, but just based on him falling. So that's how I'm kind of attacking him. But yeah, I could definitely see it. A receiver going here, but I would get bet on it being a speed guy, and which would be point to Golden.
Yeah, right now Golden slotted to Dallas at 12 in a few different mocks. To be fair, McMillan and Golden have the exact same draft position over under
Mhm.
them at 17 and a half. McMillan minus 135 to the under, while Golden is even. So bit
Yeah.
of a different situation, but same number. All right,
And we've
let's
talked and
go
we've
to,
talked about
yeah,
that
go.
one. I mean, it was a big gap too
Yeah.
between them. And the other thing I'll say is that they both have now I think the same exact number of top 30 visits. So that again, receiver is something that could go either way, but the fact that both of them are the over-unders are 17 and a half, that's essentially both of them below like the middle of the first round. So that
Mhm.
again, that's just another one of those signals that just like quarterback, just the positional stock of wide receivers in this draft seems to be dropping. So that just I'm just trying to as we're now week 9, 10 days out. That those themes are something I'm trying to pay a little more of attention to, because then depending on what position you want to take in relation to those themes, that can kind of dictate with more options in the market, which kind of group of picks you kind of look at, as we're kind of zoning in and making our last few taking our last positions heading into the draft.
Yeah, it's a smart way of looking at it, and I think it kind of works as well for like the first round because they have odds up for players to just simply be a first round pick. Some of the big movers would be Derek Harmon has moved from minus 700 to minus 1500, James Pierce Jr. minus 125 to minus 160, and Mason Taylor from plus 430 to 3 to 1. I would kind of just open the door here because I think the opportunity comes at the late stages of the first round where you
Mm-hmm.
might get a long shot to kind of sneak in and cash a ticket. But I think these have a little more volatility to them. I think because there's 32 picks in the first round, there's a lot of, opportunity for trades and things of that nature. I kind of enjoy this market a little bit more. But tell me what you think here. I mean, there's a ton of players listed out there. Is there anyone either odds on you would kind of bet into or a long shot you would take?
So I think that just of the guys you mentioned, I think when you look at, okay, you got a couple of kind of guys on the, defensive side,
Yeah.
on that defensive line moving up. And then you got a tight end, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's interesting because if we go back to these positional themes, it's like, okay, well, the two positions we saw falling, that maybe we thought there'd be a lot of action early on in the draft, a quarterback, receiver. Well, offensive line, we mentioned Banks, he's a riser. Okay, that's one guy. So offensive line as a whole could be coming up. But defense, the trenches in general, that could just be something that teams are looking at a lot more than we thought. So I think would I make a bet on like Pierce from at like minus 160? Not necessarily. Or Harmon, like you're not betting those necessarily, but I think more it's important to kind of look at them and say, how do they affect bets I do want to make? So I'm looking at those and saying, okay, defensive line, that's another spot that seems to be potentially shooting up draft boards. And then the fact that Taylor's odds are getting shorter, that's interesting because we mentioned receiver doesn't seem to be big, but tight end, I mean, we keep seeing Tyler Warren mocked like higher and higher just because he kind of fits, right? The Jets at 7, okay, he fits there. So I don't, a lot of people thought he would make it to the Colts earlier in the draft process. Now I don't know if he does. Then that brings Loveland, your guy. I know you at one point you like him to even go ahead of Warren. He could maybe he goes high. So I think Taylor probably is the most interesting one to throw something on. I don't think you want to throw something on like minus 160, in this volatile market, or definitely not minus 1500. But I think noting that Taylor is kind of moving up the board here, that is interesting to me and says, teams are kind of focused on the trenches and their heavy personnel packages and things like that. So that's kind of a signal that maybe you want to be more bullish on Warren going higher, and even a guy like Loveland, and then if Taylor maybe sneaks in. So that's how I'm kind of looking at that. But I think of those three bets, I think Taylor, just because it's longer odds, would be the one that I would sprinkle a little bit on. Wouldn't really waste my time on the other two, but I am noting that, okay, defensive line, that is something that could kind of knock some of the guys down in the first round that maybe we thought would go higher at other positions.
I'm a long shot better. Something I enjoy doing. There is a odds-on favorite here though, or odds-on player that I think has some value at minus 250, like Kenneth Grant. I don't see many uh, drafts if you simulated this, 100,000 times, whatever you want to call it, where
Mhm.
Grant wouldn't go in the first round. I think at 22, at 16, at 24. Like I just think there's a lot of opportunities for a defensive lineman
Yeah.
in that slot, and I like him, just as much as Harmon. And I think Harmon, as we just talked about, getting it to minus 1,500. Uh, just very different odds, obviously, at minus 250. And I see Grant probably not falling out of that zone. So to me, that's a decent bet. I was looking for Zabel, but I don't see him listed here. But I think he's another interesting one. He would probably be the best offensive lineman after Banks.
Hmm.
And if we're right about the three in the top 10, then there definitely will be a need there, and someone will probably take him, but I couldn't find odds for him.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that's a sharp way to think about it because especially with Grant, when you're looking at if there's a run on a certain position or like defensive line, we're looking at potentially offensive line. There could be trades. There could be these little mini trades. Teams move up a couple spots, whatnot, and all it takes is one team to have like a guy like valuing a position and then having one guy like one spot ahead of another guy on their board, and everything can get kind of turned upside down in that spot too. So it's not just with okay the top of the draft, and obviously there could be a Penix like situation that happens somewhere there, but even if there's a run on these positions, that doesn't mean that the guys are going to go in the exact order and it's just like the guys lower are going to go higher. Like it could mean that a guy kind of jumps in to that top three in that position or top four that we didn't see just because teams see a run, and they just not every team is going to have guys graded the same way. So yeah, I think that Grant pick makes a lot of sense, and that's another, I think, smart way to kind of attack it here. If you're looking at long shots, is in this middle part of the first round, middle to the late part, just kind of betting on guys to get into the round that weren't, and then betting on guys to go, a little bit earlier than they potentially would, because I do think that it's starting to look like the trenches is the way that teams are going to kind of approach this draft. So O line, D line, there might be a few guys to kind of sneak in, and if you can kind of find ways to bet those guys at long odds, I think that's the smart way to go about it.
When all else fails, go to the trenches. When they're
Yeah,
having trouble trying to figure out prospects and who's good, you just, let's get a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman and kind of move on. All right,
absolutely.
let's do some rapid fire here before we get out of here
Okay.
because there's just a ton of news stories out there. So 17 players will be live in Green Bay for the draft. The big story is the fact that Shador won't be there and that Milroe and Dart are going. And the news has been that Milroe was invited by the NFL. So do they have news? Do they kind of know what's going on there? Now, Milroe is plus 135 to be a first round pick. So is it noise? Do you care? Is this something you look at? I kind of toss it to you.
Do care because so I just think that there's a difference between mock drafting and where it's like you're essentially reacting to news that we don't really have much, and then for there to be there was actual league personnel and kind of uh mixed talking amongst themselves. There was pro days happening, so there's and now you have invites, and those come from the league. So I think those are something that it could be noise ultimately. I don't think it's like because the league invites Milroe doesn't mean some team is now going to take him. Obviously, that's not how it goes. But the fact that he was invited is kind of does raise my eyebrows a little, just because he is one of those guys that I think historically in drafts we probably would see overdrafted, right? Like he's a guy. It's like some team is going to get enamored with that type of skill set and say, okay, we can develop him. He's a prospect or whatnot, but and it could also mean that again that there's some real steam behind like teams being low on Shador. or it could just mean kind of the other thing we're kind of looking at, which is there could be a lot of movement for quarterbacks, just not necessarily early in the first round. So there could be a thing where the quarterback market starts heating up toward the back end of the first round, and maybe teams have Shador, Dart, Milroe kind of grouped into a similar pack and their late first round grades or something like that, right? And so that I am kind of paying attention to it. It could just be hype, but it's just not. It's not coming from the same people that are generally driving the market, which is going to be the mock drafters. So that's why I do pay some attention to what's going on with Milroe. I don't, not that I agree with it, but I definitely think it's worth paying attention. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on him are as a prospect, but I was kind of surprised to see his name up there with Dart and Shador.
I think we've said this before. Like when you don't have a second quarterback prospect that is 100% locked in and confident across the board, you tend to bring in other names.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's happening with Dart and Milroe. It just across the board, you're hearing other names because there's such non-confidence in Shador. Like I think if Shador was a lock to go 3 or something of that nature, you wouldn't be hearing this type of jumps in names. Like right now, Milroe, if you think he's going first round, it looks like he's being mocked 21 and 24, which would be Steelers and Vikings. So, them being enamored with a quarterback, wanting to get another one into the room. Obviously, Pittsburgh looking for anything at the moment, but for Minnesota's sake. And then I see other people trying to put him at like 32 to the Eagles or 30 to the Bills. To me, it just doesn't make sense. It's like they need other things to worry about. They're so close to either repeating or trying to like compete with the Chiefs. I'm just not sure that makes sense. All right, let's keep going here. So no first round trades right now in the at all. And that is the latest since 1993 we've seen that. So I think the question is if there is a trade, especially into the top 10, what would be the player you think people or teams would be looking for or going for or trying to pluck to do that? Because I think that is the question right now. And that's probably why we haven't seen anything, is because there isn't that player that you're willing to give up a first, a second, or, kind of mortgage for.
I think it still would be Genty. I don't know if that would be
Okay.
smart, but I just think it's hard to look at other. I think it depends. Well, and it also depends how far you're moving up, because I do think if you're looking for an offensive lineman and you feel like that top 3 is set in stone, maybe you're trying to get the last of those guys, or so maybe it's a guy like Banks or something. But that I think in the top 10, Genty makes the most sense. Genty or a quarterback still makes the most sense.
Okay.
That's how I would look at it. And maybe a guy like Will Johnson, but I feel like the drop off between defensive backs is not looked at as kind of as sharply in this draft. So I would still say Genty or a quarterback.
Okay, so I'm going to do a follow-up on Genty, which is, all the mocks have him going to the Raiders or Jaguars pretty much at this point. Almost no other spots. Do you agree with that? Do you see other value there? Like the thing that's intriguing with Genty, and then I'll let you kind of answer it, is about 36 hours ago, he was 10 to 1 to go fourth and 10 to 1 to go fifth. Now, he's as high as 18 to 1 to go fourth, and he's moved low to like plus 600. I see as high as 850 to go fifth. So it seems like there is some motivation for him to be drafted fifth right before that Raiders spot. What do you see in that Genty market?
I think what we're seeing is, as the top 3 have kind of solidified in terms of not knocking out the quarterbacks from a possibility, which we'll see if that's ultimately correct. It seems like it's more and more likely that's going to be. You've seen the Patriots at 4, there be a little bit more certainty of, okay, they're going to take either Campbell or Graham there. And then I think at 5 is where you see, well, if those guys are off the board, or even if one of those guys are off the board and Hunter's off the board, I think you're seeing well, the Jaguars could trade out of that spot, and I think that's why you're seeing the odds for Genti kind of come down for the fifth spot, because I think it could. That's where you would see another team. So I think if you're thinking that there's going to be a trade up in that first round, I think that five spot, not going to the Jaguars, but just number five in general for Genti, I think does make sense. I think that's where you're looking at. Okay, if a team wants him, the Raiders are strongly thought to get him. Now, again, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he's there at 6 and the Raiders pass on him. So I don't think you want to bet him going to the Raiders or going at 6 exactly. I think those are overpriced. But I do think if you think there's going to be a trade, I think he's probably the most obvious player. And I think the most obvious spot would be 5 for a team to trade. So, and I've been saying that for a while. And so, that's how I would kind of play that. And I think that's why those odds are coming down.
Got it. All right. Last question before we get out of here. Derek Carr. I'm just curious. So we have the news on his shoulder injury. His 2025 season's basically up in the air. Carr last dealt with a shoulder injury in 2023. He sprained his AC joint beginning this season. Didn't miss any games. Now, Saints have 4 quarterbacks on the roster. They've got Carr, Haener, Rattler, and DiNucci. They still have like 27 million in cap space if they wanted to sign another QB. People have been trying to put Shador at 9. I guess my question to you is just quickly, Saints, Carr, Shador, like what do you think is the right move there, and what do you think they'll do? Like, what's the opportunity?
I've never thought Derek Carr was the right move. I think he blocked me on Twitter or X because of it. So I've never thought Derek Carr was the right move.
Sure.
But so it's tough to say. I think the right move. Listen, if Shador is there at 9, I think this, and the Saints are picking at 9. I don't mind that pick, because I don't think that any of the quarterbacks on the roster now are the answer.
I agree.
But now, the Saints do have a lot of holes, but it all starts with quarterback. So now that, I mean, Carr was still he was the best answer on the roster, and he did play well at times last year, and so you got to hand it to him. So if he's going to be up in the air, now I think you're back at square one at quarterback. So I do think you're live, and I do think you also want to kind of zoom out for a second and look at, well, to this kind of in relation to why a guy like Milroe is getting this buzz too, because did we just essentially add another team now? Because I know some people had the Saints getting quarterbacks, but like they were all over the place. They were like that kind of chameleon. Everyone was just mocking whoever was going to be left at 9 to the Saints, whether it was a quarterback, whether it was Warren, whether it was Johnson, whoever. So if you got a team that's maybe more firmly now in the quarterback market, could that be the reason for the Milroe hype or something like that? We don't exactly know, but I think those two things could somewhat be related, and I do think the Saints are going to consider a quarterback now with this card thing. But I mean, the thing is, we're hearing all this news, and it's all like, more and more teams are kind of looking at a quarterback, and all these different quarterbacks we could just be going through like legendary levels of smoke screening here. So again, like we already placed some kind of long shots on some quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of look at some things where they just all slide too, like past the Saints, past the Steelers, because like the way we're kind of looking at it or going now, it's like, does anyone want any of these guys? I don't know. But I think the Saints at 9, I wouldn't look at Shador in terms of betting in the betting market. I think he's too overpriced now. So I think still kind of looking at the Saints to take one of those other guys, maybe a Will Johnson, somebody like that, that they were initially expected to draft is the way to go about it if you're looking to bet like the Saints at 9 or trying to figure out what they're going to do, because they're just trying to throw us off with these quarterback situations. Quarterback is still the most likely position overall, like maybe not necessarily in that top 5, because I think Genti would make the most sense, but just overall in the first round, in the first half of the first round, and just because there's so many of these quarterbacks that are potentially mocked, mid to late first round, there could be multiple Penix like trades. So at this point, I think the best move is kind of fade the certainty with quarterbacks and kind of look to like, okay, what's the most reasonable or most likely option for a team? Just taking quarterback out of the equation for a second. And, I think Will Johnson makes a lot of sense to the Saints at this spot still. I know he was popular early on. If there's a run on line, offensive or defensive line, he's a guy that could be sitting there at 9. And then also remembering that, the Panthers probably even more likely to trade out of their pick at 8. So who, maybe Shador could even go 8 before the Saints are up to pick because people think they're going to take a quarterback. So I wouldn't be betting on them taking a quarterback. I do think it got more likely. I just don't think there's value in the market on doing it. I think there's value in the market on kind of betting on, who we thought they were going to take when this whole quarterback situation was a little bit less volatile than it is now.
Yeah, I mean, if you look across the market, Shador is minus 115 at BetMGM to go to the Saints. He's minus 110 at 365 to go to the Saints. And then at FanDuel, he's plus 130. So it is drying up across the market. So that FD price is pretty good. I think the only other thing you would consider is he's 5-1 to go to the Steelers. So if he does fall that 21 slot, that'd be the best odds you can find. And then if you really want to get frisky, Minnesota's 100-1. So if Minnesota is being talked about for Milroe and all of a sudden Shador falls in their pocket, 100-1 is an interesting price for a team that might be looking for a quarterback.
Something tells me, I think Milroe there was probably somebody is high on Milroe, but we don't know who. But I can't see it just being Minnesota because you just went out and got McCarthy.
I know.
You got what you got out of Darnold, and you let him go. So it's like I just can't. I just feel like there is a team that's probably high on Milroe, but everyone's trying to guess who that is, and no one actually knows because I can't see it being the Vikings. I
mean, yeah, they're just trying to say Minnesota just because they don't have another quarterback in the room. The guy's young, someone to compete with. It probably makes more sense for it to be like a veteran and not waste the capital, but that's kind of where we sit. All right, well, we've done this for a fun hour. We could probably do this for another hour, but we're going to stop down here and we're going to be back next week. We're going to do multiple pods. We've got different guests, different things. The favorites with Chad and Simon are going to do a bunch of draft stuff. It's going to be fantastic. But for today, that's it. I am Evan Abrams. That is Chris Raybon. Thank you for listening to the Action Network podcast, and we will be back with so much more draft stuff. And the next time you hear from us, it'll be draft week. See you later, everybody.